Seattle mornings had their own kind of gray soft, sleepy, and heavy with the smell of rain. Inside a small apartment on Pine Street, Emma Walker sat hunched over her laptop, the steam from her coffee long gone. Her inbox blinked with deadlines she didn't want to face, and somewhere between exhaustion and autopilot, she opened a new tab. The cursor blinked back at her, waiting. She typed, "How to quit your job without going broke," then deleted it. Then, half smiling at her own frustration, she typed again, "How to fire your billionaire boss." The words glowed on the screen, reckless, harmless, like a quiet rebellion in the middle of a gray day. Outside, raindrops tapped the window, as if keeping time with her heartbeat. Emma didn't hate her job. Not really. She just hated who she was becoming, inside it, invisible, small, tired of pretending to be fine. She didn't know that somewhere, only a few offices away. The very man she wanted to fire would soon see those words and laugh. Not the cruel kind of laugh she feared, but the kind that would change everything. Because sometimes it takes one embarrassing mistake to finally be seen for who you are. And that's where her story begins. The rain had been falling since dawn, thin, steady, almost polite, the kind that painted the streets of Seattle in silver streaks. Inside a small apartment, 4 stories above the wet sidewalk, a coffee mug sat forgotten beside a laptop screen that glowed too bright against the gray morning. Emma Walker stared at it, her chin resting on her hand. The coffee was cold. The emails 53 unread waited like silent judges in her inbox. A small sigh escaped her lips, soft enough to disappear into the hum of the radiator. Somewhere down the hall, a neighbor's dog barked twice. A delivery truck rumbled past. Life kept moving. Hers just felt stuck. She brushed a crumb off her keyboard and opened another spreadsheet, the kind filled with endless columns of numbers that blurred into meaninglessness. Marketing reports, engagement charts, keyword analysis words that once made her feel smart, important. Now they felt like background noise in a job that had swallowed more of her spirit than she cared to admit. Her reflection blinked back from the laptop screen, pale skin under the soft blue light, hair pulled into a messy knot, sweater half falling off her shoulder. There was a tiredness around her eyes that no concealer could fix. She reached for the coffee, took a sip, winced. Cold, bitter, exactly like another Monday at Hawthorne Digital. The company prided itself on innovation and human-centered design. But the truth was, most of the humans looked like her exhausted, eyes glazed from staring at screens too long, smiling only when the boss walked by. Emma's fingers hovered over the keyboard. She didn't want to write another report. She wanted to feel something again, almost without thinking. She clicked open a new tab. Google's white page blinked, waiting. The blinking cursor looked almost alive, patient, curious, daring her. She typed, "Slowly how to quit your job without going broke." The words appeared, small and honest, like a confession whispered to no one. For a second, she laughed under her breath. "Yeah, right," she murmured. If only it were that simple. Her laugh sounded foreign in the quiet room. The rain kept falling outside, tapping the window with a rhythm that matched the pulse in her temple. She leaned back, eyes drifting toward the plant sitting by the corner of her desk, a tiny cactus in a chipped white pot. Larry. She'd named it after an old office manager who once told her, "If you don't like your job, plant something alive next to your desk. Reminds you that life can grow anywhere." Larry had survived 4 years of deadlines, coffee spills, and neglected weekends. A tiny miracle in a world of burnout. Her phone buzzed Slack messages lighting up like tiny alarms. She ignored them for a moment, watching the steamless coffee, thinking how easy it would be to just close the laptop, grab her coat, and keep walking until the rain washed every to-do out of her head. But she didn't. She couldn't. Rent, student loans, the comfort of stability. even when it felt like a cage. So, she straightened her shoulders, pulled the laptop closer, and started typing again. At 8:47 Sim. A new notification popped up on her screen. Meeting with executive team, 9:00 sharp. Her stomach tightened. Mondays always came with a meeting, and meetings always came with him. Ethan Hawthorne, founder, CEO, the kind of man who looked like he'd been designed in a lab for success. Tailored suits, perfect posture, voice calm enough to silence a room. She'd only spoken to him twice in 2 years, both times brief, efficient, like she was another task on his schedule. Still, his presence lingered in the air of every meeting. People straightened their backs when he entered. Even the hum of the projector seemed to hush itself. Emma pulled her hair into a neater bun, switched windows, and tried to look productive. The cursor blinked again, right next to the half-typed words still sitting on her browser. She meant to close it. She really did, but the thought stayed with her, glowing at the top of the screen, how to quit your job without going broke. It was almost poetic, a quiet rebellion she hadn't acted on yet. Outside, a siren wailed somewhere in the distance. Inside, her email pinged a new message marked urgent. She clicked it open. Subject line report due today. From E. Hawthorne. Her breath caught. She remembered that conversation from last Friday he'd said tomorrow. She was sure of it. Had he changed his mind, or had she misheard? The clock read 8:52. Her fingers froze above the keys. She typed back quickly. Understood. I'll send it shortly. Then whispered, shortly, meaning never, under her breath. For a moment, the weight of everything pressed down on her. The cold coffee, the endless gray, the feeling that her whole life was a draft she'd never get to edit. She rubbed her temples and closed her eyes. Somewhere deep inside, a voice whispered, "You don't belong here forever." She almost believed it. Then the sound of the rain shifted softer now, almost forgiving. Emma looked up, watching droplets slide down the glass like tiny trails of light. For the first time that morning, she felt a flicker of something she couldn't name. Maybe hope, maybe restlessness. She didn't know yet that within a few hours, that quiet search on her browser, those simple, reckless words would open a door she never expected, and that behind that door waited the one person who would change how she saw everything: her job, her boss, herself. But for now, she took another sip of cold coffee, grimaced, and whispered to the cactus, "Well, Larry, here's to surviving another day." The plant, of course, said nothing. Only the rain answered, soft against the window, as the city began to wake, and somewhere in the tall glass tower of Hawthorne Digital, a certain billionaire CEO was about to notice a name he'd never really seen before. The rain had slowed to a mist by the time Emma stepped into the glass tower of Hawthorne Digital. The lobby gleamed marble floors, reflecting the soft blue lights above, a waterfall wall humming quietly, the kind of luxury that always made her feel small. She walked toward the elevator, clutching her laptop, whispering to herself, "You can survive this day. Just one email at a time." The elevator doors slid open with a gentle chime. She caught her reflection in the mirrored wall, calm on the outside, storm inside. 27 floors later, she stepped into the open office. A faint smell of espresso and printer ink floated in the air. Screens flickered, keyboards clacked. People spoke in polite half-whispers. Seattle gray poured through the tall windows, casting everything in a cool, metallic tone. Emma's desk sat near the end of the marketing wing, between the window and the espresso machine that never worked right. She set her things down, took a slow breath, and tried to shake off the weight pressing on her shoulders. Then the glass door clicked open, the kind of click that made every head in the room turn. He walked in tall, composed, perfectly dressed, Ethan Hawthorne, CEO, billionaire, 32, and the reason half the staff forgot how to breathe during meetings. His presence changed the temperature of the air colder, sharper, like stepping into a place where mistakes weren't allowed. Emma's heart skipped, her fingers still hovering over the keyboard. She hadn't seen him this close in months. Usually, he moved through the building like a ghost, seen only through reflections in glass walls or heard in distant conference calls. But this morning, he wasn't distant. He was walking straight toward her desk. The soft tap of his shoes on the floor echoed louder than it should have. Emma felt everyone's eyes shift to her, then quickly away. By the time he stopped in front of her, the office had gone quiet enough to hear the faint hum of the air conditioner. "Miss Walker?" His voice calm, steady, precise. "Do you have the engagement report ready?" She blinked, trying to find words. The engagement report? He looked at his watch, the one due today. Her mind raced back to Friday. She remembered standing at the end of the meeting room. His words, "I'll need that by tomorrow." She was sure he'd said that. Tomorrow. Which meant Tuesday. Which meant not today. I thought you said tomorrow." She managed. Ethan's gaze lifted from his watch to her face. For a second, silence stretched between them long enough to feel like a verdict. "No," he said softly. "I said today." A flush crept up her neck, behind her. She could feel coworkers pretending not to listen, typing random nonsense just to look busy. "Of course," she said quickly. "I'll send it within the hour." Ethan nodded once, the kind of nod that closed a conversation before it began. But then he paused. His eyes lingered a moment longer than expected, studying her face, the dark circles under her eyes, the half-empty cup on her desk. Something unreadable flickered there. Curiosity, maybe, or pity. Then he straightened his jacket and said simply, "I'll be in my office." When he walked away, the noise of the room slowly returned like a radio turning back on after static. Emma let out a breath she didn't know she'd been holding. Her hands trembled slightly on the keyboard. "Well," she whispered to the cactus beside her monitor. "That went great." Larry, as usual, offered no opinion. She stared at her screen again, trying to will herself to focus. But her thoughts wouldn't settle. They spun back to his tone, the way he said her name, the way her pulse jumped when his shadow fell across her desk. He was everything she'd never be confident, controlled, untouchable. The kind of person who probably had an algorithm for breakfast and a meeting scheduled for every minute of his life. And yet, there had been something in his eyes, not arrogance, something quieter. She shook her head. "Stop it," she muttered. "He's your boss. He's also basically a computer wearing a suit." Still, her fingers wouldn't stop trembling. The clock read 9:27. She opened the report file, scrolling through charts and bullet points, rechecking every sentence like her life depended on it. Maybe it did, at least the part that could still pay rent. Every few minutes, she glanced toward the glass wall of his office down the hall. Ethan stood behind his desk, head bent slightly, one hand on his hip, the other on the mouse. Even from this distance, he radiated focus. Around him, the world seemed sharper, quieter, perfectly ordered. And then there was her half-dreaming, half-resenting, entirely human. By noon, the rain had returned, drumming softly against the windows. The office lights reflected faint halos in the glass, making it hard to tell where the sky ended and the city began. Emma leaned back, stretching her sore shoulders, her screen full of graphs and unfinished paragraphs. She closed her eyes for just a second. The hum of the building wrapped around her like a lullaby. That was when she felt it, a quiet presence beside her. She opened her eyes. Ethan stood there again. "I didn't mean to startle you," he said, though his tone didn't sound particularly sorry. She sat up straighter. No, it's fine. I'm just finishing the report." He looked at the screen. "Good. I'll review it later." Then, almost as an afterthought, he added, "How's the new campaign idea coming?" She hesitated. The campaign, the one she'd suggested weeks ago, about authentic storytelling and digital branding, had been quietly shelved after upper management decided it was too emotional. She hadn't expected him to even remember it. "It's coming," she said carefully. Ethan nodded, eyes still on the screen. Then his gaze softened. "Just a little. You look tired. Miss Walker?" Her lips parted in surprise. It wasn't the words, it was the tone. Not scolding, not superior, just noticing. "I'm fine," she said quickly, her voice steadier than she felt. "Fine," he repeated, almost to himself, as if the word had lost its meaning. Then he nodded again, more to the air than to her, and turned to leave. As he walked away, Emma watched the reflection of his silhouette fade across the glass partition. She didn't know what to think, annoyed, embarrassed, oddly seen. She looked down at Larry again. "Did you hear that?" she whispered. He noticed. "I'm tired. That's new." The cactus, predictably, stayed silent. The afternoon light dimmed into the soft glow of evening. The city outside blurred into streaks of amber and gray. The office emptied slowly, chairs scraping, footsteps echoing down the hall. But Emma stayed. She had a report to finish. And maybe, just maybe, something to prove to him, to herself. She couldn't tell which. When she finally hit send, it was 6:42 p.m. The rain had stopped. She stood, stretching, her muscles stiff from sitting too long. In the reflection of the window, she caught sight of the faint light still glowing in Ethan's office. He was still there, standing by the window, hands in pockets, staring out at the city below. For a fleeting second, their eyes met through the glass. Neither moved. Then he turned off his lamp, and the office went dark. Emma exhaled, realizing she'd been holding her breath again. Something about this day about him had unsettled the quiet rhythm of her life, and deep down, she knew. This wasn't just another Monday anymore. Something had shifted, however slightly. And once it did, nothing would ever go back to the way it was. The office was quiet after he left. Too quiet. The kind of quiet that pressed against her chest and made her heartbeat sound louder than it should. The smell of his cologne lingered in the air, clean, crisp, with something sharp underneath, like cedarwood and authority. Emma sat frozen for a moment, staring at the door that had just closed behind Ethan Hawthorne. Then she leaned back in her chair and exhaled, long and shaky. Her shoulders dropped as if she'd been holding them up for hours. She whispered to herself, well, that was humiliating. Larry, the cactus, didn't disagree. The report was sent. The day was technically done, but her mind wouldn't stop spinning. Her pulse still carried the echo of that short exchange, the way he looked at her, the way she felt cornered, small, and seen all at once. The office lights above buzzed faintly, one flickering near the printer. Outside, the rain had turned into fog, the kind that wrapped the city in a hush, softening everything except her thoughts. She clicked her mouse aimlessly, the screen glowing blue across her tired face. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, unsure whether to close the laptop or throw it out the window. She muttered, half to herself, half to the universe. You know what I need? A guidebook. Then, with a dry laugh, she opened a new browser tab. The cursor blinked. Patient as ever, her fingers started typing before she could talk herself out of it. How to fire your billionaire boss. She pressed enter, and just like that, her frustration took form in words stupid, impulsive words, but they made her grin. The search results appeared instantly, filling her screen with absurd titles. 10 ways to deal with a toxic CEO. What to do when your boss makes you cry. How to quit gracefully without losing your 401k oshin. She scrolled, chuckling under her breath. Oh, look, a survival guide for corporate hostages, she murmured. It wasn't about quitting anymore. It was about letting off steam, pretending she had power in a world that never let her feel it. The glow from the monitor reflected in her glasses. For a moment, she imagined what it would feel like to actually do it, to look Ethan in the eye and say, "You're fired." The thought was so ridiculous, she snorted softly into her hand. Then she pictured his face, those calm gray eyes narrowing in confusion. Somehow, that image made her laugh harder. Across the office, the cleaning crew had started vacuuming, the hum low and steady like background music. Most of her coworkers had gone home. The few who remained were silhouettes behind glass partitions, their screens flickering in the dim light. She leaned closer to her laptop, still smiling to herself. "You're fired. Mr. Perfect," she whispered, typing it into the search bar just for fun. "You and your flawless jawline and your impossible expectations." The words looked ridiculous on screen, but something about seeing them there, her private rebellion against an untouchable man, felt freeing, like exhaling after holding her breath all day. She rubbed her temples, laughing quietly until her smile faded into a sigh. The truth was, she didn't hate him. Not really. She hated the way he made her feel like she had to be sharper, faster, better, just to be noticed. Like he carried his world in perfect order while hers fell apart at the seams. The screen dimmed. She moved the mouse to keep it awake. The clock in the corner read 7:38 p.m. Maybe she should go home, but something in her wanted to stay just a little longer, as if she could rewrite the day by thinking hard enough. Her phone buzzed a message from her best friend, Lily. Still at work, Emma typed back, "Yup, just me, Larry, and capitalism." Lily's reply came with a laughing emoji. "You need a vacation or a new boss." Emma smirked. "Funny you say that. Google and I are already working on it." She hit send, chuckled once more, and stretched her neck. The rain outside had started again, tapping against the glass like a metronome. Somewhere down the hallway, a door opened and shut, followed by the faint echo of footsteps. Probably security. She didn't look up. She was too busy adding to her absurd list of ways to survive billionaires. But then she felt it, a presence, a stillness behind her that didn't belong to the empty office. Her hands froze on the keyboard. The footsteps had stopped, too close to ignore. Slowly, she turned. The hallway light reflected on the glass wall beside her desk, and for half a heartbeat, she thought she was imagining it. The outline of a tall figure, faintly visible in the reflection, standing near the doorway. Her pulse skipped. She blinked, then shook her head. Probably just her imagination. Ethan had left hours ago. He was probably at some dinner meeting, charming investors, not lurking near her desk while she Googled ways to fire him. Still, she felt a strange unease crawl up her spine. She minimized the browser, her heart thudding. "Relax," she whispered. "You're alone, just tired." She stood, gathering her things, and shut the laptop with a soft click. The screen went dark, but for a split second, she thought she saw the faint outline of the last words she'd typed still burned into her mind. "How to fire your billionaire boss." She slipped her laptop into her bag, turned off her desk lamp, and took one last look around the office. Everything looked normal, papers stacked neatly, screens asleep, the hum of electronics filling the silence. But as she walked toward the elevator, the air felt heavier. In the reflection of the steel doors, she caught her own faint smile, tired and a little defiant. "Tomorrow," she murmured, "I'm going to act like today never happened." The elevator chimed. She stepped inside. Down below, the city glimmered through the drizzle, lights smeared by rain. Somewhere far above her, behind a wall of tinted glass, another light was still on inside Ethan's office. A figure stood near the window, phone in hand, the faint blue glow reflecting on his face. He wasn't on a call. He wasn't reading emails. He was looking at something on his screen, something that made him pause, then lean back in his chair with a slow, quiet laugh, a kind of laugh she'd never heard from him before. And though she couldn't know it yet, that small, reckless Google search, the one meant to release a little steam, had just rewritten both their stories. The rain fell harder, drumming steady against the glass tower, while somewhere between two glowing screens, a spark quietly began to change everything. The next morning came too early. Seattle was still half asleep. a thin mist rolling between the buildings as Emma crossed the street with her usual paper cup of coffee. Her hair was pulled into a loose bun, the kind that said, "I tried, but not too hard." The elevator ride to the 27th floor felt longer than usual. Every second ticked in the silence like a warning she couldn't quite name. When she stepped out, the air smelled of fresh ink and tension. She told herself it was just another Tuesday, another mountain of emails, another day pretending to be fine. By 9, the office was alive. Keyboards clicked in rhythm. Screens glowed in soft blues. And Ethan's shadow passed across the frosted glass walls of his office like a quiet storm. Emma kept her head down, headphones in, fingers moving faster than her thoughts. She'd stayed up late rechecking her report, terrified he'd find another flaw. Her eyes burned from lack of sleep. Still, she couldn't shake the memory of last night, the soft sound of his laugh she hadn't heard, the one that seemed to echo in her head even now. She tried to push it away. Focus. Emma, focus on work. But work didn't want her today. Her computer was sluggish, the spreadsheet freezing every time she moved a cell. She muttered under her breath, tapping the side of the laptop. "Come on, not now." The fan whirred louder. The cursor lagged. Then, without warning, the whole screen went black. Her stomach dropped. "No, no, no, don't you dare," she whispered, pressing random keys like a prayer. Nothing, just darkness. The faint reflection of her worried face blinked back from the screen. A voice came from behind her, calm and familiar. Having technical issues, her heart skipped. She turned. Ethan stood there, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a tablet. He must have come out of his office quietly. He had a way of doing that, appearing without warning, like he materialized from the glass itself. "Oh, yes," she stammered. It just froze. "I think the report file's too big." He stepped closer, leaning slightly over her desk. "May I?" Before she could protest, he reached for the keyboard, his sleeve brushing her arm. He smelled faintly of clean linen and something warmer, like cedar and coffee. Her breath caught. She moved back an inch, giving him space. "It's fine, really, I can." But he was already typing, his fingers moving with effortless precision. "You've got too many browser tabs open," he said without looking up. "That'll slow the processor." Her cheeks warmed. "I know. I was just, researching what his tone was neutral, but something about it made her pulse race." She opened her mouth to reply, but before she could, the laptop screen flickered. A soft ping. The browser reopened every single tab, restoring itself at once. And there it was. Big, bold letters across the center of the screen. "How to fire your billionaire boss." Time stopped. Neither of them moved. The words glared like a neon sign, impossible to ignore. Her heart dropped into her stomach. She froze, every nerve in her body screaming to do something. Close the tab. Throw the laptop. Teleport out of existence, anything. But her hands wouldn't move. Ethan stared for a long second, his reflection caught in the glow of the screen. Then, slowly, his lips curved, not a smirk, not disbelief. A laugh, low, warm, almost human. Emma blinked. "Did he just laugh, I see," he said finally, straightening up. "Researching company strategy. Were you?" Her mouth opened, but no words came out. She could feel the blood rush to her face, hot and unrelenting. It was a joke. I mean, not a joke, but just a stupid search. Stress relief." He raised an eyebrow, clearly enjoying her unraveling. "Stress relief. Yes, because firing billionaires is cheaper than therapy," she blurted, and then immediately wanted to die. For a heartbeat, there was silence. Then Ethan laughed again, soft this time. Genuine. "You might be onto something," he said. "Though I'd recommend you start with millionaires. Less paperwork." Emma stared, caught between mortification and disbelief. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even pretending to be. He was amused. "I'm so sorry," she said quickly. "It was just a dumb moment. I didn't mean relax." "Miss Walker," he interrupted gently. "No offense taken." Her eyes darted to the screen, still frozen on the incriminating words. She reached forward to close it, but Ethan stopped her hand lightly with his own. His touch was brief, but it sent a tiny spark down her arm. "Leave it," he said. "I could use a reminder." A reminder. He tilted his head, his expression unreadable. "That sometimes the people working for me have thoughts they don't say out loud. It's healthy." Emma blinked, completely thrown off balance. He turned away, walking back toward his office with that quiet confidence that made everyone step aside. Halfway there, he paused and looked back at her. "For what it's worth," he said, "if I ever do get fired, I'd prefer you break the news. You seem honest." And then he was gone. The office was silent again, except for the faint hum of her laptop fan and the wild beating of her heart. Emma sat perfectly still, eyes locked on the empty doorway, trying to process what had just happened. He laughed. He actually laughed. She covered her face with her hands, half in horror, half in disbelief. "Oh my God," she whispered. "I just Googled my way into unemployment." But deep down, a different feeling stirred. Something strange, light, like the smallest crack in a wall she hadn't realized was there. She glanced at the glowing words still on her screen, now ridiculous, almost funny, and clicked the tiny X to close them. The sound of the click echoed in the quiet, final and soft. Outside, the rain had stopped. Sunlight slipped between the clouds, landing right on her desk, warm against her hands. For the first time in weeks, Emma smiled, a real one, small but true, because somehow, the man she thought couldn't possibly have a heart had just shown he did. And though she didn't know it yet, that single laugh, the one she never expected, had just changed everything. The light flickered once on the glass wall of his office, his shadow moving behind it. She could almost hear his voice again, calm and amused, stress relief. Huh. Her smile deepened. Maybe tomorrow wouldn't be so terrible after all. Still, when she glanced at Larry, the cactus, she whispered, "Remind me to never use Google again at work." The plant, as always, stayed silent, but the faint warmth of sunlight on her desk seemed to hum in reply, quiet, steady, like a heartbeat. For a few seconds after he laughed, the world seemed to hold its breath. The sound wasn't sharp or mocking. It was soft, low, and real, like something warm cracking through the polished glass of his usual tone. Emma sat frozen, unsure whether to feel mortified or strangely relieved. She had never heard Ethan Hawthorne laugh before, not in meetings, not in interviews, not even in those rare company gatherings where everyone tried too hard to look relaxed. And now, here he was, smiling because of her. His hand rested lightly on the edge of her desk as the echo of his laughter faded into the still air. "At least you're honest," he said, eyes glinting with quiet amusement. Emma blinked. Honest. The word landed softly, like something fragile being handed back to her. For weeks she'd been trying to be perfect, precise, efficient, invisible enough to survive, but not honest. Not like this. She could feel the corners of her lips twitch. Half a smile she couldn't stop. "I'll, take that as a compliment." "It is," he said. His voice was calm again, but lighter somehow, the edges less sharp. "Most people spend years trying to tell me what I want to hear. You just type it into Google." Her cheeks burned, and she let out a nervous laugh. "So I'm efficient." That earned her another small smile. It wasn't the kind that reached his eyes fully, but it was getting there. He looked down for a moment, as if deciding whether to say something more, then gently closed the laptop lid. "You don't need to worry about this." "Really?" "I do, though," she murmured, too softly for him to hear, or maybe he did, because he gave her a look that almost felt like understanding. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was still, like standing in the quiet after a storm, when the air smells clean again. Ethan straightened, his usual composed posture returning, though something in his expression had softened. "Take the rest of the afternoon to finish your revisions. Don't rush." Emma stared, a little dumbfounded. "You're not mad, should I be? I did just Google how to fire you." He tilted his head, pretending to think. "Fair point." Then, with a faint smirk, he added, "If I ever need tips on firing myself, I'll know who to ask." Her laughter slipped out before she could stop it small, genuine, the kind that comes from being caught off guard. For a moment, they were just two people in a quiet office, not a CEO and his exhausted employee, not a billionaire and a marketing assistant, just a man and a woman sharing an absurd moment of honesty. She watched as he turned to leave, his steps measured, the faint reflection of his figure stretching across the glass wall. Just before he reached the door, he paused and looked over his shoulder. "Miss Walker?" "Yes, that cactus," he said, nodding toward the tiny pot beside her monitor. "What's its name? Larry?" A faint quirk appeared at the corner of his mouth. "Of course it is." And with that, he was gone. The door clicked softly behind him. Emma sat there for a long time, staring at the spot where he'd stood. Her heart was still pounding, but differently now, not from fear, not from embarrassment, but from something she couldn't quite name. She leaned back in her chair, exhaled, and whispered to the cactus. "Well, Larry, we survived. The plant, naturally, said nothing. But she could have sworn the little thing looked a bit prouder today." Minutes passed. The office noise returned in small waves, the whir of printers, footsteps down the hallway, someone laughing softly by the coffee machine. Life went on, as if the moment hadn't happened at all, but Emma felt it lingering inside her, quiet but unmistakable. She opened her laptop again, heart still fluttering, and clicked open her project folder. The glow of the screen washed over her face, and for the first time in weeks, the work didn't feel so heavy. Her fingers moved with ease, words flowing, ideas connecting in ways they hadn't before. She wasn't sure if it was adrenaline or the strange calm his laugh had left behind, but something had shifted. By late afternoon, the clouds outside began to thin, letting a pale band of sunlight stretch across the glass wall beside her. She watched the city shimmer faintly, the raindrops on the windows catching bits of gold. The world looked softer, like it had decided to take a deep breath, too. She took a sip of coffee. It was cold again, but she didn't mind. For once, she wasn't measuring her day in caffeine and deadlines. She was replaying a laugh, one single laugh that felt real. It was strange how quickly a person could change shape in your mind. Just yesterday, Ethan Hawthorne had been an impossible man, untouchable, all numbers and control. Now, he was someone who laughed at a mistake instead of punishing it, someone who asked about a cactus for no reason at all, someone human. Emma smiled faintly. Maybe she didn't understand him yet. Maybe no one at this company really did. But for the first time, she wanted to. Her computer chimed with a new email. She glanced at the sender, E. Hawthorne. Her pulse jumped again, though she told herself it was nothing. Just work. Probably a follow-up about the report. She opened it, bracing herself. But it wasn't about work. Subject confidential inquiry. Message Miss Walker. Hypothetically, if one were to want to fire their billionaire boss, what's the proper procedure? For a heartbeat, she just stared. Then the laugh burst out of her, full and bright, bouncing softly off the glass walls. She shook her head, typing back, reply, step 1, start with decaf. You clearly don't need any more power boosts. She hesitated, then hit send, somewhere behind the frosted glass of his office. She imagined him reading it, maybe even smiling again. The thought made her chest feel lighter than it had in a long time. Outside, the last of the rain slid down the window, leaving clear streaks against the fading light. Emma watched one drop trace its way down to the sill, slow and certain, before whispering, "You know, Larry, maybe this week won't be so bad after all." The hum of the office softened, the city glowed a little warmer, and somewhere, behind a closed door, another smile quietly mirrored her own. The day after the Google incident, the office buzzed with quiet whispers that Emma was too tired to notice. She'd spent most of the morning trying not to think about it. The laughter, the smile, the fact that she'd accidentally shown her boss a search result titled, "How to Fire Your Billionaire Boss." Every time she remembered it, her cheeks burned again. But when she saw Ethan's email later that afternoon, short and polite, asking her to drop by his office for a quick chat, her heart nearly stopped. She read it 3 times. Quick chat. Those 2 words could mean anything from "I'm firing you" to "I'm suing you." Still, she smoothed her hair, straightened her blazer, and walked toward his office like a person marching into her own execution. The hallway felt longer than usual, the soft hum of the air conditioner the only sound accompanying her footsteps. His office door was half open, warm light spilling across the carpet. She knocked lightly. "Come in," his voice said, calm and low. She stepped inside. Ethan stood by the window, his back to her, looking out over the Seattle skyline. The rain had stopped, and the city glowed beneath a pale afternoon sun, the kind that made the glass towers look almost golden. "Miss Walker," he said, turning to face her. "Have a seat." Emma obeyed, clutching her laptop like a shield. His desk was immaculate, no clutter, no coffee rings, just precision. Even his pen sat perfectly centered beside a leather notebook. He leaned against the edge of the desk, arms loosely crossed, and studied her for a moment. Not coldly, just curiously. "You seem nervous," he said. She gave a nervous laugh. "Well, when the CEO asks to talk after you've Googled how to fire him, it's hard to feel relaxed." That earned the smallest smile from him. Fair point. For a few seconds, silence. Then he said, "You know, I could have easily ignored it, pretended I never saw it." "I wish you had," she muttered under her breath, then covered her mouth in horror. "I mean, sorry. That came out wrong." He chuckled softly. "No, that's fair too." Something in his tone eased the knot in her chest. He wasn't angry. In fact, he almost seemed intrigued. "Can I ask," he said, "what made you type that in the first place?" She blinked. "You really want to know? I do." Emma hesitated. Then she sighed, setting her laptop on her lap like a weight she'd been carrying too long. "Honestly, I was just tired. It was late. The report crashed twice. And you'd moved up the deadline without warning. I guess I just needed to let off steam." He nodded slowly. "You could have gone home, though." "Yeah," she said, "but home doesn't pay rent, and Google's cheaper than therapy." That made him laugh again, and she couldn't help smiling. The sound filled the office softly, bouncing off the glass walls, breaking the tension she hadn't realized she was holding in her shoulders. When it faded, he tilted his head slightly. "You said you were tired. Is it just the work?" Her first instinct was to say yes and leave it at that, but something in his expression, steady, patient, maybe even kind, made her pause. "It's not just work," she said quietly. "It's everything. The pace, the pressure, this feeling that no matter how hard you try, it's never enough. Some days it feels like I'm on a treadmill going faster than I can run." He listened without interrupting, hands still folded loosely in front of him. She went on, surprised at her own honesty. "I used to love what I did. I used to care about campaigns, ideas, storytelling, but now it's all numbers and metrics and buzzwords. Somewhere along the way, it stopped feeling human." Her voice faltered. The words hung in the air like fragile glass. After a moment, he spoke softly. "What did you want to do?" Before this, I mean, she hesitated, almost embarrassed to say it out loud. I wanted to write children's books. That seemed to catch him off guard. Children's books, she nodded, her lips curving into a small, wistful smile. Yeah, stories that make kids feel less alone. My mom used to read to me every night when I was little. Fairy tales, bedtime stories, even the sad ones. They always made the world feel a little softer. I wanted to do that for someone else someday. Ethan's expression shifted. Something flickered behind his eyes. Something that wasn't business or efficiency. For the first time, he didn't look like the CEO of Hawthorne Digital. He looked like a man remembering something far away. What stopped you? He asked. Emma shrugged, staring down at her hands. Life, I guess. Student loans, rent, the usual grown-up stuff. Writing doesn't pay the bills. Marketing does. He was quiet for a long while. Then he said, almost to himself, "You'd be surprised how many people in this building feel the same way." She looked up, surprised. He met her gaze. They wanted to create, but the higher they climbed, the less time they had for it. The world has a way of trading passion for stability. It was strange hearing that from him, the man who seemed to have it all. She wondered if he was talking about himself. The silence between them softened again. Outside, the clouds moved, and light spilled across his office, landing right on the cactus sitting on her lap. She hadn't realized she was still holding it until then. Larry, her quiet little desk companion. Ethan noticed, the corner of his mouth lifting. "So this is Larry?" Emma smiled. "Yeah, my emotional support cactus." "Why Larry?" She laughed. "No reason. He just looked like a Larry. He's been with me since my first week here. Survived 4 moves, 3 bosses, and countless coffee spills." He chuckled. "Resilient little thing." "Exactly," she said. "Every time I want to quit, I look at him and think, if he can keep standing in this chaos, maybe I can too." Ethan's eyes softened. "You know," he said quietly, "most people would have bought something fancier. A flower, maybe. I'm not most people," she replied. "I can see that," he said. The way he said it, calm, steady, almost gentle, made her chest tighten in a way she didn't expect. For a moment, neither of them spoke. The office, usually filled with the hum of computers and distant voices, felt still, almost suspended. Finally, Ethan glanced toward the window. "I'm sorry if I've made your job harder than it needed to be," he said. "I tend to push people, sometimes too hard." Emma's throat tightened. "You don't have to apologize." "Maybe not," he said, "but I should." She didn't know what to say, so she didn't say anything. The light shifted again, softer now, catching the faint reflection of both of them in the glass wall. 2 people sitting across from each other, divided by titles and walls, but connected, if only for this small, strange moment. By honesty, when she finally stood to leave, he didn't stop her. He just nodded once and said, "Thank you for telling me the truth." She smiled faintly. "You started it." And as she walked out of his office, Larry in hand, she realized that for the first time since she joined Hawthorne Digital, she didn't feel invisible. The door clicked softly behind her. Inside. Ethan stood still for a long while, staring at the cactus-shaped imprint her hands had left on his desk. Then, almost to himself, he whispered, "Larry, of course." Outside, Emma stepped into the fading light of early evening. The air smelled of rain and city coffee. Somewhere deep inside her, something fragile had shifted like the first small crack in a wall that had been holding her back for years. And just before the elevator doors closed, she caught herself smiling. The next morning came quietly, with thin sunlight spilling through the blinds and a calm that felt almost fragile. Emma sat at her desk earlier than usual, sipping her coffee in slow, deliberate sips. The office was still half empty. Only the faint hum of machines filled the silence. Larry stood proudly in his little pot, tilted slightly toward the light, as if he, too, was curious about what the day might bring. Her conversation with Ethan the previous afternoon replayed in her mind like a song that wouldn't stop looping. The sound of his voice when he said, "Thank you for telling me the truth," lingered somewhere between her ribs. It wasn't what he said, it was how he said it. Gentle, almost human. The elevator chimed behind her, pulling her out of her thoughts. She didn't turn, but she didn't have to. There was a certain rhythm to his footsteps, steady, unhurried, confident, without arrogance. Ethan Hawthorne walked into the room with the quiet command of someone who didn't need to announce his presence. "Good morning, Miss Walker," he said as he passed by. She looked up, startled, nearly spilling her coffee. "Oh, morning, Mr. Hawthorne?" He stopped. The faintest curve appeared on his lips. "No Larry today?" She blinked, then laughed softly. "He's right here. Always." She gestured to the cactus on her desk. Good," he said, eyes flicking to the tiny plant. "I was worried we'd lost our department morale officer." She smiled, trying to ignore how easily he made her heart trip. "He's tougher than he looks." "So I've noticed." He studied her for a second longer, then nodded toward her open spreadsheet. "You're early." "Couldn't sleep," she admitted, half joking. "Too many creative ideas at 3 ma'am. Or maybe too much caffeine." "Or both," he said, glancing at the coffee cup in her hand. "Try switching to tea sometime. It's less chaotic." "Coming from a man who built a company on chaos," she teased, before realizing what she'd said. Her hand flew to her mouth. But he laughed, genuinely this time. "You're not wrong." The sound warmed the cold morning air between them. After a brief pause, he said, "Walk with me." It wasn't really a question, but there was something kind in his tone, an invitation, not an order. She hesitated for only a second before nodding. They moved through the hallway, the quiet hum of computers fading behind them. The conference rooms stood empty, glass walls reflecting the gray-blue light from the city outside. Ethan carried his tablet under one arm, but didn't glance at it once. Finally. As they reached the end of the corridor overlooking the skyline, he stopped. "You know," he said, "I've been thinking about what you told me yesterday." Emma blinked. About what part? About how work stopped feeling human. Her breath caught. She hadn't expected him to bring it up again. He turned slightly toward her, hands in his pockets. "It made me wonder, if you dislike this job so much, why are you still here?" The question wasn't harsh. It was simple, honest, but it hit her harder than she expected. She stared out the window, her reflection hovering faintly against the cityscape. For a long moment, she didn't answer. Then, softly, she said, "Because I'm good at it." He looked at her, waiting. She went on, voice quieter now. "I don't love it. Not every day. But I've never been the kind of person who quits just because something's hard. I guess I stay because I don't like failing, even if it's not what I dreamed of doing." Her fingers brushed the rim of her coffee cup, and maybe because, deep down, I'm still hoping one day it'll mean something again. Ethan was silent for a moment. His expression softened, just slightly. "You know," he said finally, "most people would have just said, 'the paycheck.'" She smiled faintly. "That too." He laughed under his breath, honest and self-aware. Dangerous combination. The quiet stretched between them again, not heavy this time, just full. He studied her face in the reflection of the window, the way her eyes held both exhaustion and fire. It was the first time he saw her not as an employee, but as a person who refused to let go, even when everything around her tried to make her smaller. He'd met hundreds of people in his company, all brilliant, ambitious, eager to impress, but very few stayed simply because they refused to give up. That kind of resilience, he thought, couldn't be bought. Finally, he said, "You remind me of someone I used to know." She turned toward him, curious. A good reminder or a bad one? He smiled, eyes drifting to the window. Both. There was something in his tone, a shadow, maybe even a memory, but before she could ask, he changed the subject. "Do you ever write anymore?" She shook her head. "Not really. I keep telling myself I will when I have time. But time's a luxury around here." He nodded. "Maybe you should make it one." She looked at him, unsure if he was serious. "You mean, write again?" "Why not?" he said simply. "You're already good at telling stories. You told me yours yesterday." And I listened. Her chest tightened. For someone so known for control, Ethan's words carried a quiet sincerity that felt disarming. "Maybe," she said, smiling, "but I doubt I'd ever write anything you'd read." He turned to her fully then, his eyes steady. "You'd be surprised?" Their eyes met. And, for the first time, she noticed something new in his, something softer, like the edges had blurred, respect, maybe even admiration. It was a strange moment, suspended between them like a thin thread of light, not romantic, not yet, just recognition. The kind that happens when two people finally see each other, clearly. A knock on the nearby door broke the stillness. An assistant poked her head in, murmuring something about a call from London. Ethan nodded once, then looked back at Emma. "Duty calls," he said. She smiled. "Always." As he turned to leave, he hesitated at the doorway. "For what it's worth." "Miss Walker," he said quietly, "I'm glad you didn't quit." And just like that, he was gone. Emma stood there for a long while, staring at the skyline, her reflection mingling with the fading light. She thought about his question, why she stayed, and realized she wasn't entirely sure anymore. Maybe it wasn't just the paycheck. Maybe it was the small, unexpected moments like this, the cracks in the walls that let a little humanity shine through. When she finally returned to her desk, the office was alive again, full of sound and motion. But something inside her had shifted. She glanced at Larry, his tiny spikes catching the glow from her desk lamp. "You heard that, right?" she whispered. "He's glad I didn't quit." The cactus, steady as ever, didn't answer. But somehow, in the quiet hum of her workspace, Emma felt something she hadn't felt in a long time. Pride, and just beneath it, the first flicker of something else, something unfamiliar and a little dangerous. Hope. By Thursday, the city had slipped back into its usual rhythm, rain against glass, coffee in paper cups, deadlines that came faster than sleep. Emma sat at her desk, her mind still wandering somewhere between exhaustion and wonder. The memory of that conversation with Ethan replayed quietly in her thoughts. His question, her answer, the way he'd looked at her like he was seeing her for the first time. She'd felt strangely lighter since then, but also unsettled as if the air between them had changed texture. It was no longer cold, but she couldn't quite call it warm either. It was something in between, something undefined. The day stretched on in its usual blur of emails and meetings, until, just as she was packing her bag to leave, her phone buzzed. From E. Hawthorne, subject need a moment. Her stomach dipped. She stared at the screen, reading it twice before replying. "Of course." "Coming by?" he answered almost instantly. "Conference room B, 5 minutes." She almost laughed. 5 minutes, his favorite phrase, his quiet command disguised as efficiency. She slipped on her jacket, whispered to Larry, "Wish me luck," and headed down the hallway. When she stepped into the conference room, Ethan was already there. The blinds were half drawn, painting the room in soft stripes of gray and gold. He was leaning over the table, sleeves rolled up, looking less like a CEO and more like someone trying to solve a puzzle that refused to fit. He looked up when she entered, and for a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. "Miss Walker," he said finally. Thanks for coming. You did say 5 minutes, she replied, forcing a small smile. And you're the boss. He almost smiled back, but it didn't reach his eyes. Actually, he said, that's part of what I wanted to talk about. Her pulse quickened. Did I do something wrong, No? He said quickly, shaking his head. If anything, I owe you an apology that she hadn't expected. An apology. He gestured toward one of the chairs. Sit. She sat slowly, confused, watching as he took the seat across from her. For once, there was no tablet, no laptop, no barrier of business between them, just him, looking more human than she'd ever seen him. He ran a hand through his hair, exhaled softly, and said, Do you remember that first report I asked for? The one I told you was due a day early? Of course, she said carefully. I thought I misheard you. You didn't. He said, I moved the deadline on purpose. Her brows furrowed. You... what? He met her gaze evenly. I wanted to see how you'd react under pressure. For a moment, she just stared at him. The words sank in slowly, like drops of cold rain finding their way under a collar. You tested me. Yes, he said quietly. Something hot flared in her chest. Do you do that to everyone? Or am I just lucky it wasn't personal? He said quickly. It's a habit I test new department heads, team leads, people with potential. I wanted to see if you'd crack or adapt. Wow, she said, her voice sharper now. And here I thought it was because you didn't trust me. He frowned slightly. That's not it. Then what is it? Ethan. The name slipped out before she could stop it. Because from where I'm sitting, it sounds like you made me run a marathon just to see if I'd trip. He didn't answer right away. The room went quiet again, filled only by the faint hum of the city outside. Finally, he said, softer this time. I needed to know who you were when things got hard. She blinked, caught between anger and confusion. Why? Because I've built a company full of people who are brilliant when everything's easy, he said. But the moment things fall apart, they disappear. You didn't. You stayed. You kept going. Even when it wasn't fair. Her jaw tightened. So, this was some kind of moral experiment. No, he said, leaning forward slightly. It was curiosity. She looked at him, frustration flickering beneath her skin. You could have just asked. He smiled faintly. Would you have told me the truth that shut her up? Because maybe he was right. She might have said what she thought he wanted to hear. And yet, the truth of it didn't make her less angry. It made her sad. She crossed her arms, staring at the table. You know, for someone who talks about innovation and empathy, that's a pretty old-school way of leading. I know, he said quietly, and I'm trying to change that. There was something in his voice she hadn't heard before. Something fragile. When she finally looked up, she saw it not arrogance, not power, but weariness. The kind that comes from being the one everyone looks to for answers. The kind that comes from being alone too long. You really are something else, she said softly, shaking her head. You drive people crazy and then make them feel bad for being mad. He chuckled, low and almost shy, a terrible skill I've perfected over time. She smiled despite herself. Well, congratulations. You passed your own test. He leaned back, studying her face. You're angry. Yeah, she said, a little. But you're still here, like I said before, she replied, meeting his eyes. I don't quit. He held her gaze for a long moment, and something passed between them, not words, not quite understanding, but something real. The air felt charged, quieter, deeper. Finally, he said, You have more strength than most people I know. Emma? The sound of her name in his voice made her breath hitch. She forced herself to look away. Don't make me start liking you, Mr. Hawthorne. It'll ruin my brand. That made him laugh again, not loud, but full, warm, and a little self-conscious. It softened the sharp lines of his face. When the laughter faded, he said quietly, "You already do." The words hung between them, not flirtation exactly, but truth wrapped in something gentler. Emma's chest tightened. She didn't answer. Couldn't. Outside, the rain started again, soft against the glass, like a secret being whispered only to them. She gathered her courage, stood, and said, "Next time you want to test someone, just buy them coffee instead." He smiled. Noted. As she walked toward the door, he called after her, "Emma." She turned, hand on the handle. "I meant it," he said. "I respect you." She nodded, unable to hide the small smile that pulled at her lips. "Careful. Ethan, you're starting to sound human." And with that, she left. In the quiet that followed, he sat back, looking at the empty chair where she'd been. For the first time in years, he realized he'd met someone who didn't flinch under his scrutiny. Someone who challenged him. Someone who made him feel seen. He exhaled slowly, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. Through the rain-streaked glass, the city blurred into gold and gray, two colors bleeding into one, much like the line between them. That night, Seattle was bathed in quiet light street lamps flickering through the drizzle, headlights smearing across the wet pavement. Emma walked home slower than usual, her umbrella catching the soft rhythm of the rain. The world outside was calm, but inside her chest, things were anything but. The conversation from earlier still echoed Ethan's voice, steady yet vulnerable. The way he'd admitted to testing her, the way he'd looked at her when she didn't walk away. She hated that it had made her heart ache and soften at the same time. She told herself it was just exhaustion, just a long week, just complicated. By the time she reached her apartment, the city had settled into its nighttime hum, the faint buzz of neon signs, the whisper of tires on wet asphalt. She kicked off her heels, hung her coat, and collapsed onto the couch. Larry, her cactus, sat proudly on the windowsill, framed by the city lights. "Well," she sighed, looking at him, "we survived another day with the boss." Her phone buzzed on the coffee table. She reached for it lazily, expecting a message from her friend Lily, or maybe another late-night email from HR. But the name on the screen made her freeze. E. Hawthorne. Her thumb hovered over the notification. The preview line read, "Gieln Sao Dung Chen Dan Hi Muin Sa The ISP Min." Her eyes widened. Then she laughed an honest, startled laugh that filled her small apartment. "You didn't," she whispered to the phone. But he had. She opened the message. "Next time, use incognito mode when you're planning to fire your billionaire boss. E.H." Emma shook her head, a smile spreading across her face before she could stop it. The audacity, the playfulness, the fact that he'd texted her at all. She typed back quickly, fingers trembling just slightly. "Next time, try not to sneak up behind your employees while they're Googling you. E.W." She hit send, set the phone down, and waited, her heart beat faster than it should have. A few moments later, the screen lit up again. "Fair point. I'll schedule my sneak attacks with HR next time." She couldn't help it. She laughed again. Out loud this time. Then, just as she was about to set the phone aside for good, another message appeared. "Also tomorrow, stay after hours. There's a special project I want to discuss." She blinked, then reread it, twice. "Special project," she repeated under her breath. "That sounds suspicious." Larry offered no advice, of course. Her mind began to race. Was this a trap? A real project? A test? Or was it, and she could barely bring herself to think the word something else? She texted back, "Should I be worried?" His reply came almost immediately. "Only if you plan to Google me again." Emma let out a small groan and threw herself back on the couch, covering her face with a pillow. He's impossible. she muttered with a smile she tried to hide said otherwise. The rest of the evening passed in a blur of nervous energy. She reheated leftovers she didn't eat, half-watched a show she didn't follow, and kept glancing at her phone every few minutes, like it might tell her what special project meant. The thought of being alone in the office with him after hours made her pulse quicken in a way that had nothing to do with anxiety, or at least not the kind she wanted to admit. By the time she crawled into bed, the rain had stopped, the city outside her window shimmered in faint blue and gold. She stared at the ceiling for a long while, listening to the quiet buzz of her thoughts. Ethan Hawthorne was a mystery, a man made of contradictions, brilliant yet lonely, cold yet unexpectedly kind. The more she tried to figure him out, the less she could, and somewhere between frustration and fascination, she'd started to care. She turned on her side, the phone still glowing faintly on the nightstand. One last message from him blinked at the bottom of their thread. "Don't worry, Miss Walker, it's not a trap. You'll see." She didn't know what he meant, but something about those words "you'll see" felt like a promise. She smiled, closing her eyes. "We'll see." "Mr. Hawthorne," she whispered. The next day unfolded slowly. The office buzzed as usual, but Emma couldn't focus. Every email, every conversation seemed to move in slow motion. Her co-workers noticed the change, the faraway look in her eyes, the quiet hum in her voice, and assumed she was just tired. She didn't correct them. By late afternoon, most of the floor had emptied out. The lights dimmed slightly, the sound of footsteps fading into the distant echo of the hallway. Emma checked her phone again. Nothing new. At exactly 6:03 p.m., she heard the familiar low voice behind her. "Still here." She turned. Ethan stood in the doorway, his jacket draped over one arm, the top button of his shirt undone, a rare sight that made him look less like a CEO and more like someone real. "Still working," she said lightly. "You did say there's a special project." "I did," he said, stepping closer. "Come with me?" He walked ahead, and she followed, her curiosity outweighing her nerves. The hall was quiet except for the soft sound of their footsteps and the faint hum of the city outside. He led her not toward his office, but toward the top floor, a place she'd only seen from afar, where the glass walls curved into a panoramic view of Seattle's skyline. When the elevator doors opened, she gasped. The entire floor was empty, except for one long table set near the windows, covered not in reports or contracts, but takeout boxes and 2 cups of coffee. She turned to him. "This is the project." He smiled a small, quiet smile that reached his eyes this time. "In a way, I thought we could discuss something important. Like why someone as talented as you keeps forgetting to eat dinner." She blinked. "You ordered food." "I did," he said simply. "I thought it was time we talked about balance." She laughed softly, shaking her head. "This is your idea of a meeting." "Not a meeting," he said. "A conversation." The air between them shifted again, softer, almost fragile. She looked out the window, the city lights flickering below them like stars scattered upside down, and in that quiet space, she realized maybe Special Project wasn't about work at all. Maybe it was about understanding. And maybe, just maybe, about something that neither of them had planned for. The night stretched before them, golden and unhurried, as somewhere between laughter and silence, the line between boss and employee began to blur. The office was almost unrecognizable after dark. Without the usual hum of keyboards and chatter of voices, it felt like a different world, entirely hushed, still, almost sacred. The city outside glowed through the glass walls, Seattle's skyline twinkling like it had secrets of its own. Emma stepped out of the elevator and hesitated, her heels clicking softly on the marble floor. Every light on the lower floors had gone out, except for the faint golden hue spilling from the top-level conference room. Her chest tightened. She told herself it was just dinner, just a conversation, but she wasn't sure she believed that. When she pushed open the glass door, the sight made her stop. The long table that usually held stacks of reports and cables had been transformed. Crisp white linen, soft candles flickering in glass holders, dishes from half a dozen restaurants, arranged like a feast for two. The air carried the faint aroma of roasted garlic and something citrusy lemon. Maybe. It didn't look like a meeting. It looked like intention. Ethan stood near the window, his tie gone, sleeves rolled, hair slightly tousled in a way that didn't seem accidental. When he turned and saw her, his expression softened, and that small, unreadable smile, the one that always seemed to carry too much behind it, appeared. "You came," he said simply. "You did say special project," she replied, crossing her arms. "Though I expected spreadsheets, not candles." He smiled faintly. "It's still a project, just not the kind we usually do here." She raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" "Not tonight," he said. "Tonight. I just want to understand the person who had the courage to Google how to fire me." Her breath caught, half a laugh, half a shock. "You're not letting that go, are you?" "Not until I figure out why it made me respect you more than any quarterly report I've read in the last year." There was no arrogance in his tone, just curiosity, honesty, and for some reason, that unnerved her more than his usual intensity. He gestured toward the table. "Come on, sit, before the pasta gets cold." She hesitated, then took a seat across from him. The candles flickered between them, casting gentle shadows that made the whole world seem slower, softer. She picked up her fork, more to keep her hands busy than anything else. "So," she said, "this is what billionaires do for fun. Surprise their employees with dinner and existential questions." He laughed, and it was the kind of sound that disarmed her completely. Only the interesting ones. They began to eat. The food was good, too good, but it wasn't what she noticed most. It was the way he listened. Every time she spoke, he leaned in slightly, his eyes never wandering, his expression unguarded. When she told him about growing up in Portland, about her mom working double shifts, and how she taught her that effort mattered more than glamour, he didn't interrupt once. When he finally spoke, his voice was lower. "You know, I wasn't supposed to take over Hawthorne Digital. It was my brother's job." She looked up. "You have a brother, Had," he said softly. "He died 10 years ago. Car accident. I was 24. I think that's when everything changed. I stopped sleeping, stopped laughing, just worked." The air shifted, heavy with something she couldn't name. She hadn't expected that. Not from him. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. He nodded once, eyes distant for a moment. "I don't talk about it much. People prefer the story where I'm the ambitious genius, not the one where I'm just trying not to fall apart." She set her fork down. "Maybe you should tell that story more often." His gaze flicked back to hers, sharp but soft all at once. "Why? Because it's human," she said. "And people need to see that. I think that's what makes you real." The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was tender. The kind of quiet that exists only between two people who've both stopped pretending. For a while, they just sat there, the city flickering beneath them. She noticed his hand resting near his glass, the faint scar on his knuckle, a detail small enough to mean nothing, yet somehow it did. "Finally." She smiled. "You know, this is the weirdest dinner I've ever had." He chuckled softly. "Weird's good. Normal's overrated. Spoken like someone who's never had to explain this to HR." He grinned. "I'll take my chances." She laughed, shaking her head. But when their eyes met again, the humor slowly melted into something quieter. Something that made the air between them hum. "Emma," he said, almost a whisper. "Can I tell you something?" She nodded, heart thudding softly. "When I saw that Google search on your screen, I laughed. But not because it was funny. I laughed because it reminded me that someone in this company still feels you weren't afraid to want something different, even if it was to fire me." her breath caught, a small smile tugging at her lips. "Well, I'm glad my frustration inspired you." "It did," he said. "You made me remember that not everything has to be about control." The candles flickered, and in that moment, the distance between them didn't feel like hierarchy anymore. It felt like gravity, slow, inevitable, drawing them closer with every word. She looked at him, the city lights reflecting in her eyes. "You really think people like me can change the way people like you run the world?" "I think people like you already are," he said softly. And just like that, the space between them disappeared. He leaned forward slowly, carefully, like he was asking for permission without words. And when she didn't move away, he kissed her. It wasn't planned, it wasn't polished. It was the kind of kiss that happens only when two people stop overthinking long enough to feel alive. For a moment, everything stilled the rain outside, the hum of the city, the noise of everything they'd been carrying. Just stillness. When they finally pulled apart, Emma was the first to speak, her voice barely above a whisper. "That's not part of the project, I assume." He smiled a quiet, genuine smile. "No, that's strictly personal." She exhaled, a shaky laugh escaping her. "Good to know." The candles burned lower, outside. The rain started again, soft against the glass. Neither of them said much after that. They didn't need to. The silence was enough warm, fragile, and new. When Emma finally left that night, the city lights followed her reflection in the glass elevator. She caught her own faint smile and shook her head. Something had shifted again, not like the click of a door, but like the opening of one. And as she stepped out into the cool night air, she realized the thought that scared her most wasn't that she'd fallen for her boss. It was that maybe, just maybe, he'd fallen too. Outside, the night had that strange stillness that only comes before a storm, a quiet so complete it felt almost fragile. Inside the glass tower of Hawthorne Digital, the lights were dim, the city humming faintly below. Emma and Ethan stood near the elevator, the last of the candles from their dinner flickering weakly on the table behind them. There was something between them now, new, delicate, unspoken, and for a brief, impossible moment. The world felt right. Then Ethan's phone vibrated. Once, twice, then again, in rapid succession. The light in his expression dimmed. He glanced at the screen, and the air around him seemed to shift. "What is it?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. He didn't answer right away. His jaw tightened as he read through the notifications, his thumb scrolling fast. "It's the security system," he said finally. "There's a breach." Emma frowned. "A breach, like its servers," he said sharply. "Someone's in our network." Before she could respond, he was already moving toward the elevator, phone pressed to his ear. "Run diagnostics on every terminal," he said into the receiver. "Lock out remote access. No one gets in or out until we isolate the source." Emma followed, her pulse quickening as they descended to the lower floor where the tech teams worked. The moment the elevator doors opened, chaos met them, head-on computer screens flashing red, people rushing between desks, the air buzzing with tension and the faint scent of overheating circuits. "What's going on?" Ethan demanded. One of the IT leads, a man with tired eyes and shaking hands, looked up. "It's bad, sir. Someone cloned part of our client database. The trail leads to an internal account." Ethan's tone dropped, colder now. "Who?" The man hesitated. Then Travis Hines. Emma froze. Travis. The same coworker who'd spent months dropping passive-aggressive comments about her getting too close to the boss. The same man who'd once joked too loudly that she must have found a shortcut to the top. Ethan's face went pale, then hard. "Get him in here," he said. But they didn't have to, because Travis was already standing by the server racks, hands in his pockets, eyes flat with something between defiance and fear. "Don't bother," he said coolly. "You already know?" Ethan stepped forward. "What did you do?" Travis shrugged. What everyone's been thinking about doing for years, leveling the field, by stealing, by surviving, Travis shot back. You think people don't see it? Ethan, how you play favorites, how he pointed at Emma, gets more meetings with you in a month than some of us do in a year. Emma felt the blood rush to her face. That's not. Oh, save it, he said, his voice rising. You think no one noticed the looks, the late hours. You really think they won't eat that up out there? Ethan took another step closer, his voice sharp as glass. You planted something, didn't you? Travis smirked. Not planted, released. Emma's stomach dropped. What did you release? He smiled slow, smug, cruel. A little story, a few screenshots, enough to make the world believe their precious golden CEO is sleeping with his subordinate. The silence that followed was suffocating, the kind that presses against your chest until it hurts. Ethan didn't move, didn't blink. Why, he asked finally, his voice low. Travis's smile faltered for the first time. Because I'm done watching you get everything while the rest of us rot in cubicles. You and your golden girl here, you think you're better than everyone else. Let's see how your investors like a scandal. Emma's breath hitched. Her hands were trembling now, but she tried to keep her voice steady. You don't understand. That's not what I understand perfectly, he cut in. You think this company runs on loyalty and hard work. It doesn't. It runs on power, and power is about to shift. Ethan took a slow breath. You've just committed a felony. Travis laughed. And you've just given me proof. Then he turned toward the door, but Emma moved faster. Before he could take another step, she grabbed her phone, hit record, and said, Funny? I thought you said you released it. His head snapped back toward her. What you just admitted to leaking false information, she said evenly, holding the phone up so the red light blinked bright in the dark. And it's all on record. For a split second, no one moved. Then Ethan pulled his own phone out, dialing security with quiet precision. His tone was calm, almost too calm. We have a breach confirmed. Contain the subject. The look on Travis's face shifted from arrogance to panic. He lunged toward her, but Ethan stepped in front of her before he could reach her. Don't, Ethan warned, voice low but lethal. Footsteps thundered down the hall. 2 security officers appeared, flanking Travis before he could move again. He struggled, cursed, but it didn't matter. Within moments, he was gone, dragged down the corridor, his voice echoing off the sterile walls. The room fell silent, just the sound of the server fans humming like a steady heartbeat. Emma stood still, phone still in her hand, her own breath shaky and uneven. He said, he released it. She whispered, Ethan, if it's already out there. He met her gaze. Then we handle it. But the press will say what they always say. He interrupted gently. And I'll do what I always do, face it. His calm should have comforted her. But it didn't. Because beneath it, she could see something else. Weariness, anger, and something dangerously close to guilt. They walked together to his office. Outside, thunder rolled in the distance, deep and low. The storm that had been threatening all night had finally arrived. When they reached his door, he stopped, hand still on the handle. Emma, he said quietly, whatever happens next, you didn't do anything wrong. Her voice trembled. Neither did you. He smiled faintly, though it didn't reach his eyes. That's not how it'll look. And for the first time since she'd known him, she saw at the cracks in the armor, the vulnerability of a man who'd built walls too high to climb down from. Outside, lightning split the sky, illuminating the city in harsh, fleeting white. The rain followed, drumming against the glass like a warning. Inside the quiet office, Emma stood beside him, both of them staring at the glow of his monitor as alerts flooded in headlines already spreading like fire. She didn't say anything, just reached out, hesitated, and rested her hand lightly on his arm. He didn't pull away, and though the world outside was unraveling, for one suspended heartbeat, It felt like the only storm that mattered was the one between them. The rain hadn't stopped since midnight. It clung to the windows in restless streaks, tracing the glass like nervous hands. Inside, Hawthorne Digital's executive floor, the lights burned low, a sleepless glow that made the walls look thinner, the shadows sharper. Emma sat across from Ethan in his office, both of them too awake to pretend they weren't exhausted. The storm outside felt like a reflection of what was happening inside. Reports of the data leak were everywhere, now the media swarming, investors calling, lawyers circling. Ethan hadn't left his desk in hours. His tie was gone, sleeves rolled, the top button undone. His silence worried her more than any headline could. He stared at his computer screen, not reading, not typing, just thinking. "You need rest," she said softly. He didn't look up. "Rest is a luxury I can't afford right now. Then at least eat something." She tried again, setting a cup of coffee beside him. He smiled faintly, eyes still fixed on the screen. "If I make it through the night, I'll consider it." She wanted to say something to remind him that he wasn't alone, but before she could, there was a sound, a sharp ding from the elevator at the end of the hallway. The clock on the wall read 11:46 p.m. No one should have been there. Ethan frowned. Security, Emma stood. "I'll check," but she didn't have to. The doors slid open with a mechanical sigh, and 3 men stepped out, dark suits, wet shoes, and the kind of posture that carried authority without invitation. The tallest one, broad-shouldered, mid-40s. A face that looked carved from stone led the way. "Mr. Hawthorne," he said smoothly, like they'd met before. "We need to talk." Ethan straightened in his chair. "And you are?" The man ignored the question and walked further into the office, water dripping from his coat. The other 2 followed, silent and alert. "You've had quite a night," the man continued. "Shame about the data breach. Word travels fast." Ethan's jaw tightened. "If you came to offer sympathy, you're wasting your time." The man smiled thinly. "Not sympathy. Opportunity." He reached into his coat and pulled out a folder, sliding it across Ethan's desk. "You're about to lose your biggest acquisition deal to your competitors. The board's panicking. Your investors are restless. We can make that go away." Emma felt her stomach twist. There was something about his tone calm, confident, that made her want to run. Ethan opened the folder. Inside was a short document, typed and signed in neat legal language. One phrase stood out in bold: "Voluntary withdrawal from the Westbite merger." He looked up. "You want me to back out?" The man nodded. Quietly. "You walk away. They bury the scandal. No one gets hurt." Ethan leaned back, his expression unreadable. "And who exactly is they?" The man's smile widened. "People who prefer staying anonymous, but they're generous when treated with respect." Emma stepped forward before she could stop herself. "So, this is blackmail?" The man turned to her slowly, as if only just realizing she was in the room. His eyes lingered on her for a moment too long. "And who might you be?" "She's my communications director," Ethan said evenly. "Ah," the man said. "Then you already know how these things go. A whisper here, a headline there. Public opinion is a fragile thing. Once it breaks, it doesn't mend." Ethan stood, his height closing the distance between them. "You think you can threaten me into walking away from a billion-dollar merger?" The man tilted his head. "I don't think... Mr. Hawthorne." "I know." Silence. The kind that hums before it cracks. Then, without warning, Emma spoke. "What happens if he doesn't?" The man's eyes flicked toward her again. Colder now. "Then maybe the rumors don't stay rumors." He took a slow step forward. "You're already the face of them, aren't you? The loyal subordinate, the late-night confidant." Her heart stung, but she didn't flinch. "Careful," she said. "You're getting predictable." He smiled. Predictability is useful, especially in people like you. Ethan's voice cut through the tension. Get out. But the man didn't move. You'll regret that. I already do, Ethan said. The man's hand slid into his coat again, not for a weapon, but for something else. His phone. He placed it on the desk, screen facing up. On it was a photo Ethan and Emma from last night's dinner, caught mid-laugh. The angle was too clean to be coincidence. Emma's breath caught. You've been following us, monitoring, the man corrected. Just insurance, in case you needed persuasion. That was when Emma moved. Slowly, deliberately. She reached into her bag and took out her own phone, pretending to fumble with the screen. You're right, she said softly. Insurance matters. The man frowned. What are you? She hit record. The red light blinked to life. This is Emma Walker, Communications Director at Hawthorne Digital, she said clearly, currently documenting an attempted act of corporate extortion by 3 unidentified men. Ethan caught on instantly, his expression unreadable, but his eyes alive with understanding. The man's smile faltered. Turn that off. I don't think so, she said, keeping her voice steady. Then she tapped another button, the speakerphone. Yes, she said loudly, as if answering a call. Agent Lewis, we have the suspects in the building. Data transmission is live. Confirming you're receiving this in real time. The man froze. What are you doing? Emma kept going, calm but loud enough to echo. Yes, I've initiated the trace. Data transfer is already backing up to the Bureau's system. ETA on your team. Ethan bit the inside of his cheek to keep from smiling. The man's composure cracked. You're bluffing? Am I? Emma tilted her head, her thumb hovering over the phone, because the FBI tends to take corporate espionage very seriously, especially when it involves billion-dollar assets. For a long moment, no one breathed. Then faint but unmistakable, the sound of sirens pierced the night, growing louder, closer, like the storm itself had turned into law and order. The man's face went pale. His companions shifted uneasily. We're leaving, he snapped. Ethan stepped forward, voice low and dangerous. That's the first good decision you've made tonight. The men backed toward the door, their polished shoes squeaking against the marble. One of them muttered something about a misunderstanding, but Ethan didn't respond. He just stood there, tall and silent, while the sirens wailed closer. When they were gone, Emma exhaled a sound halfway between relief and disbelief. Her hands were shaking. I can't believe that worked. Ethan looked at her, the corner of his mouth lifting. You just outsmarted professional extortionists. She smiled weakly. I just bluffed the FBI into existence. He let out a soft laugh, the first real one in hours. Remind me never to play poker with you. The sirens faded outside, replaced by the steady hum of rain again. The storm had passed, at least for now. Ethan walked to the window, watching the city lights blur through the raindrops. You didn't have to do that, he said quietly. Yes, I did, she replied. He turned, meeting her eyes. Why? Because you would have done it for me. The silence that followed said more than either of them could. Outside, thunder rolled one last time, then drifted away. Inside, 2 people stood in the dim glow of an office, still trembling from chaos, tired, shaken, but unbroken. Emma's phone buzzed softly in her hand. A notification, recording saved. She smiled faintly, whispering more to herself than to him. Insurance matters. Remember? Ethan turned toward her, his voice barely above a whisper. You're extraordinary. Emma. And in the reflection of the rain-streaked glass, their eyes met not as boss and employee, but as 2 people who had just faced the storm together, and somehow, against all odds, were still standing. The next morning arrived quietly, as if the city itself was catching its breath after the storm. The clouds hung low over Seattle, pale gray and tired, their edges soft against the rising sun. Inside Hawthorne Digital, the air felt different, not tense anymore, just heavy, like the aftermath of something that had nearly broken, but didn't. Emma walked through the glass doors with her badge still trembling slightly between her fingers. The lobby smelled faintly of coffee and ozone, the kind of scent that follows a sleepless night. Travis had been arrested before dawn. Security footage, recorded calls, the digital trail, everything lined up perfectly. The authorities handled it quickly, almost ruthlessly. By the time Emma arrived, the whispers had already started circulating about his jealousy, his betrayal, the way he'd tried to sell confidential data to a rival corporation. Some people even whispered about the other rumor, the one involving her and Ethan, but for once, she didn't care. She found him in his office, standing by the window, his posture a strange mix of exhaustion and relief. The skyline stretched before him, washed clean by rain. When he turned, there was something in his expression she hadn't seen before. Gratitude? Yes, but also humility. "Morning," she said softly. He smiled faintly. "You came back." She gave a small laugh. "You say that like I had a choice. After last night," he said, "most people would have run. Most people didn't have their boss almost blackmailed in front of them." She replied, "Besides, I'm not most people." That made him smile again, the kind of smile that didn't quite reach his eyes but still felt real. He gestured toward the chair across from his desk. "Sit," he said, "please." She did. For a while, neither of them spoke. The hum of the city outside filled the silence, soft and constant. Then Ethan broke it. "They caught Travis about an hour ago," he said quietly. He tried to claim it was someone else's idea, that he was just following orders. Emma nodded, and the people behind him. He hesitated. "They'll be handled, but not by me. I'm done letting that kind of poison live rent-free in this company." She watched him for a moment. The weight in his voice wasn't just about business. It was personal. The kind of weariness that comes from fighting too long to prove you can't be broken. He ran a hand through his hair and let out a breath. "Emma," he said, "I owe you everything." She shook her head. "No, you don't." "Yes, I do." He leaned forward, elbows resting on his knees. "If you hadn't been there last night, if you hadn't thought on your feet, you would have handled it," she interrupted gently. "You always do." He looked at her for a long moment, as if trying to read something in her eyes he wasn't sure he had permission to see. "No," he said finally. "Not this time." Something in her chest tightened. She looked down at her hands, at the faint ink stain near her thumb, a reminder of late nights, endless notes, the life she'd built one deadline at a time. "You'd have done the same for me," she said. "Maybe," he said softly, "but you did it first." A pause, a quiet one. Then he stood and crossed the room to where she sat. He didn't speak right away. He just stood there, looking down at her, the city behind him glowing with morning light. "I've been thinking," he said finally, his voice low, measured, about everything that's happened, about the way this place nearly fell apart. He took a breath, and about the way you didn't. She met his eyes. Someone had to stay standing. He smiled. "You make it sound simple." "It's not," she said, her tone quiet but steady. "But neither is giving up." That made him laugh softly, a short, unguarded sound that made her heart stutter. Then he said something she didn't expect. "You know," he murmured, "I think I've just been fired." She frowned. "Fired from my old life," he said, his eyes still on hers. "From solitude, from pretending that work is enough." Her breath caught. "Ethan," he smiled again, that slow, crooked smile she'd come to recognize as his only tell. "I think," he said, "I've been officially terminated from my life as a single man. It took her a second to realize what he meant. And when she did, the laugh that escaped her wasn't planned, it just happened, light and disbelieving. "That's terrible," she said, shaking her head. "Do you practice these lines, or do they just come to you naturally?" He chuckled. "Honestly, I'm improvising." "Well," she said softly, "you might need to work on your delivery." They both laughed, then real laughter, the kind that loosens the tightness in your chest and makes the world feel just a little bit safer. When it faded, the silence that followed was warm, comfortable. He took a step closer, not enough to touch, just enough that she could feel his presence. "Emma," he said quietly, "you changed everything for me. I don't even know when it happened. Maybe it was the moment you called my bluff. Maybe it was when you looked me in the eye and told me you didn't quit, even when you hated the job." She looked up at him. "And what about now?" He smiled. "Now. I can't imagine this place without you." Her heart fluttered, but she tried to play it off with a grin. "Careful. That sounds dangerously close to favoritism again." He laughed, shaking his head. "Maybe it is." The morning light shifted, spilling across his desk, catching in the faint gold of his watch, the edge of her coffee cup. Everything looked calmer now, the kind of calm that comes after everything breaks. And somehow, the pieces still fit when you put them back together. For the first time in weeks, Emma felt like she could breathe, like she could look at the world without that constant weight on her shoulders. As she stood to leave, he caught her hand just for a moment. The touch was brief but steady, his thumb brushing lightly against her knuckles. "Thank you," he said softly. She smiled. "For what? For staying?" She didn't answer right away. She just looked at him, the man who had once seemed untouchable, now standing in front of her, utterly human. "Always," she whispered. He let go, slowly, reluctantly. And as she walked toward the door, the sunlight caught in the glass, scattering reflections around the room. Behind her, Ethan watched, a faint smile curving his lips. Maybe the storm had ended, maybe it hadn't. But one thing was clear, they'd both survived it, together. And for now, that was enough. 3 weeks later, Seattle had traded its storms for sunlight. The air was clearer, the mornings lighter, and the city in its own quiet way seemed to be smiling again. Inside Hawthorne Digital, life had returned to rhythm. Screens glowed, keyboards clicked, and voices carried softly through glass walls. But for Emma, nothing felt quite the same. Everything was the same, and yet completely different. She had a new office now, not huge, but filled with light. A single-potted cactus sat on her desk. Larry, still surviving, still stubborn, a small reminder of how far she'd come. The brass plate on the door read, "Emma Walker, Creative Project Director." She'd read it a dozen times that morning and still didn't quite believe it. Ethan had made the announcement himself. 3 weeks after the scandal died down and Travis's arrest was finalized. It had been quick, quiet, decisive, just like everything he did. But when he'd said her name in front of the entire department, something had shifted in the room. Pride, respect, maybe even a little envy. Yet Emma hadn't seen any of that. She'd only seen his eyes, steady on hers, calm and warm. Now, she worked directly with him. Meetings, planning sessions, creative reviews, long hours that somehow felt shorter when he was around. They kept it professional, of course. But no rulebook could hide the way his gaze softened when he looked at her, or the way her voice grew quieter when he leaned closer to ask a question. At first, she'd worried about the whispers, about people assuming the worst. But that fear had faded quickly, because in the end, what spoke louder than gossip was the work. Her projects ran smoother, her team stronger, her ideas sharper. She wasn't just his favorite anymore. She was good, really good, and everyone could see it. Still, there were moments, small ones, like today. The elevator doors opened on the top floor, and there he was. Ethan leaning against the railing, scrolling through his phone. He looked different these days, softer somehow. The same tailored suits, the same confidence, but less armor in the way he carried himself. "Morning, Director Walker," he said, not looking up. She smiled. "Morning, Mr. Hawthorne." He finally glanced up, that familiar smirk tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Still sounds strange. What does you... having a title that outranks half my executives?" She laughed. "You gave it to me." "I know," he said, pretending to sigh. "One of my better mistakes." She raised an eyebrow. "Mistakes." He stepped closer. "Let's just say I'm learning that promoting someone you can't stop thinking about has... complications." Her heart skipped a beat, but she masked it with a teasing tone. "Sounds like an HR nightmare." He smiled. "Or a fairy tale. Depends on who's telling the story." They walked down the hall together, their footsteps echoing softly against the polished floors. It should have felt like any other morning, but it didn't. There was a quiet electricity between them, a rhythm that neither of them tried too hard to hide anymore. In meetings, she noticed how he deferred to her ideas now, how he listened, really listened even when others disagreed. In return, she'd learned to speak with a steadier voice, to trust her instincts instead of shrinking into the background. The balance between them had shifted. Once, he'd been the sun bright, impossible to ignore. Now, they were two lights, steady beside each other. But behind the confidence, Emma sometimes caught herself wondering how long could this last? Could love survive in a place built on deadlines and boardrooms? Could two people build something real while the world watched, waiting for them to fail? Those thoughts crept in late at night, when the city was quiet and her phone buzzed softly with his messages. Still awake, working too hard again. "You know there's life beyond PowerPoint, right?" And every time, she'd smile, typing back something teasing, something simple. But inside, she knew it wasn't the words that mattered. It was the fact that he asked, that he cared. One evening, after everyone had left, she stayed behind in the glass-walled conference room, finishing up a proposal. The city lights glittered outside, stretching endlessly into the water. She was scribbling notes when his reflection appeared in the glass behind her. "You know," he said quietly, "you're the only person in this building who still works later than I do." She looked up, smiling. Old habits. He stepped closer, resting one hand on the table, the other in his pocket. "You don't need to prove anything anymore?" "Emma," she tilted her head. "Maybe I'm not proving anything. Maybe I just love what I do now." That made him pause. "You do, don't you?" She nodded. "You help me remember that work doesn't have to mean losing yourself." He studied her for a long moment, the flicker of city light reflecting in his eyes. "And you help me remember that leadership doesn't have to mean being alone." The air between them was still, tender. For a while, they just stood there, two people who'd been through fire and found warmth on the other side. "Finally," he said, almost in a whisper, "can I tell you something without it ending up on a PowerPoint slide?" She laughed softly. "Depends. Is it about quarterly growth or emotional vulnerability?" He grinned. "The second one." "Then, maybe," she said, her voice teasing but gentle. He took a slow breath. "Every morning, when I walk into this building, I look for you first. It's the most unproductive habit I've ever had, and I don't care." Her heart stilled. For a moment, she couldn't find words. "Ethan," he shook his head slightly. "You don't have to say anything. I just needed you to know." She smiled that quiet, knowing kind of smile that said more than words ever could. "You realize we're standing in a room with glass walls?" "Right." He chuckled, lowering his voice. "Then, let's just make sure we give them something worth talking about." And for the first time in weeks, she didn't overthink, didn't analyze, didn't hide. She just stepped closer, until the distance between them wasn't distance anymore. When he kissed her, it wasn't like the first time, that hesitant, stolen moment. It was steady, certain, the kind that feels less like a spark and more like finding your rhythm again. Outside, the city kept shining, oblivious, alive. When they finally parted, she rested her forehead against his, breathing softly. "This is crazy," she murmured. He smiled. "Maybe. But so was starting this company. And that worked out." She laughed a quiet, genuine laugh that filled the room. As they turned off the lights and walked out together, the office around them glowed faintly with the reflection of the city beyond. There was no need for promises, no declarations, just a feeling steady, certain that they were exactly where they were meant to be. And as the elevator doors closed, she caught his hand, just for a second. Not to hold him back, just to remind herself that it was real, that after everything, somehow, they'd both found their way home. It was a Monday morning, quiet, golden, the kind that made even the glass towers of downtown Seattle seem softer. The city shimmered under a thin veil of light fog, the air cool and steady. Inside Hawthorne Digital, everything looked calm again. No storms, no headlines, just the hum of a company finding its rhythm after chaos. Emma arrived early, as she often did. The office was still, the only sound the faint buzz of lights warming up for the day. She walked into her space, her own office, something she still hadn't quite gotten used to, and placed her coffee down beside the window. She was scrolling through her morning notes when she heard a faint, deliberate tap on her door. She looked up, and there he was. Ethan Hawthorne, holding something in his hands. It wasn't a folder or a tablet. It was green, small, spiky. "Morning," he said casually, stepping inside. "I brought a guest." She blinked, then smiled when she saw it. "Larry," he nodded, setting the little cactus gently on her desk before leaning against the chair across from her. "Larry has been promoted," he said with mock seriousness. "Effective immediately?" She laughed. "Promoted to what? Exactly, Chief Resilience Officer." She shook her head, grinning. "You're ridiculous." "Maybe," he said, his tone softening, "but I figured he deserved it. After all, he's survived. What neglect? Cold coffee spills, 2 company scandals, and your occasional rant about capitalism. Hey," she protested gently, "Larry's been through worse. Remember when I dropped him last year?" "Exactly," Ethan said, eyes glinting with amusement. "And yet, here he is, still standing, still alive, still growing." Emma looked down at the cactus, its tiny green arms reaching awkwardly toward the window light. Something about it, the simplicity, the stubbornness tugged at her chest. "He's tougher than he looks." Ethan's voice grew quiet. "So are you." She looked up, meeting his eyes. The smile faded a little, replaced by something warmer, deeper. He stepped closer and picked up the small pot, holding it in both hands as if it were something precious. Then, without breaking eye contact, he walked across the room and placed Larry on his own desk right beside the monitor where Emma used to sit months ago, before everything changed. He turned back to her. "There," he said, "now he's between us." "Why?" she asked, half amused, half touched. "So we both remember," he said simply, "that sometimes the smallest things survive the biggest storms." Her throat tightened. She smiled, but her eyes shimmered. "That's surprisingly poetic for a guy who writes financial reports." "I've been taking lessons," he teased, leaning against the desk. "From who?" He shrugged lightly. "A certain creative director who refuses to quit, even when everything tells her to." For a moment, the world felt still, just the soft whir of the air conditioner, the gentle pulse of city noise through the glass. Emma walked over, standing beside him. "Larry looks good there," she said quietly. "He does?" Ethan paused, then added with a small grin. "He'll probably get more sunlight than either of us." She laughed softly, the sound breaking the quiet. True. They stood there, side by side, both looking at that tiny cactus, an ordinary thing that had somehow become extraordinary, a symbol of everything they'd endured: mistakes, misunderstandings, fear, and the slow, unexpected bloom of something real. After a while, Ethan said, "Do you remember the first day I saw Larry?" She chuckled. "How could I forget you thought it was fake?" "In my defense," he said, "I'd never seen a plant survive an office that long. That's because I actually took care of it." He looked at her, voice softening again. "Exactly." She turned toward him, her smile fading into something quieter. "You know," she said, "it's funny. When I first got this job, I thought I was just trying to survive here, to prove I could make it in this world, the one with suits and deadlines and too much coffee. And now," he asked. She hesitated, then smiled. "Now I think I was just waiting to grow into myself." He nodded slowly, his eyes steady on her. "And you did." They stood there for a while, in a silence that didn't need to be filled. When she finally spoke again, it was barely above a whisper. "I used to think people like you and people like me lived in different worlds. Maybe we did," he said gently. "But worlds can overlap, especially when someone decides to plant something small in the middle." Emma's eyes drifted to the cactus again. "Larry," she murmured, half laughing. He smiled. "Larry." There was a light knock at the door, one of the assistants asking about the next meeting, and the moment dissolved softly, like a breeze scattering dust. Ethan glanced toward the sound, then back at her. "Duty calls, always does," she said with a little smile. But as he walked toward the door, he stopped and looked back. "Hey, Emma." "Yeah." He nodded toward the cactus. "If I ever forget what matters, remind me to look at him." She tilted her head, smiling. "I'll hold you to that." When he left, the room fell quiet again. Emma sat back at her desk, the faint hum of the city folding around her. The sunlight had shifted, spilling across the cactus, making its tiny spines glow like threads of gold. She reached out, touched the edge of the pot with one finger, and smiled to herself. Larry, the survivor, the reminder. She thought of all the things that could have gone differently, all the moments that could have broken her, but they didn't. Because sometimes, it isn't the big gestures or the perfect plans that save us. It's the small, stubborn things that keep growing even when no one expects them to. And as she looked toward Ethan's empty chair, sunlight still touching Larry between them, she felt a quiet certainty bloom inside her chest, the kind that doesn't demand attention, only truth. Some things don't need to be said. They just live. It was late, the kind of late when even the city seemed to exhale. The offices of Hawthorne Digital were empty now, the corridors quiet, the hum of machines fading into stillness. Outside, the lights along Lake Union shimmered on the dark water, each reflection trembling softly with the wind. Emma shut down her computer, the familiar click echoing in the silence. She turned to see Ethan standing by the window, his jacket draped over one arm, the other hand holding the small pot they both now knew by heart. "Ready?" he asked. She smiled, nodding. "Is Larry invited too?" "Of course." He said, "He's family now." She laughed, and the soundlight, unguarded, filled the empty office like music. Together. They walked toward the elevator. He carried the cactus carefully, as if it were something fragile, something worth protecting. The ride down was quiet, the kind of quiet that doesn't need words. The city lights flickered past the glass as they descended, and in that soft, golden glow, Emma caught a glimpse of their reflection, two people who had once been strangers on opposite sides of power, now standing shoulder to shoulder, equal, at peace. Outside, the night air was crisp, the smell of rain lingering faintly. Ethan's car waited at the curb, sleek and dark, but the mood between them wasn't polished like the world they worked in. It was simple, human. As they drove, the city slipped by in gentle rhythm, the whir of tires on wet pavement, the soft hum of the radio playing something slow and low. Neither of them spoke much. They didn't need to. There were some silences that said more than words ever could. When they reached his apartment by Lake Union, the air was cool, carrying the scent of pine and water. The lights from the marina danced on the surface of the lake, broken only by the ripple of a passing boat. Ethan parked and turned off the engine, but neither of them moved for a while. Finally, Emma spoke, her voice soft. "It feels strange, doesn't it?" He turned to her. "What is finishing something that never really felt like a beginning?" she said. He smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what new beginnings feel like." They carried Larry upstairs, the small cactus cupped between their hands as if it were a secret only they understood. Ethan unlocked the door, flicked on the lights, and suddenly the room was warm, soft amber against clean wood and glass. Reflections of water shimmering just beyond the windows. He set Larry down on the coffee table. "Welcome home, little guy." Emma smiled, kneeling beside the pot. "He's been through a lot. So, have we?" She looked up at him, and for a heartbeat, the world felt still the sound of the lake outside, the faint ticking of a wall clock, the gentle rhythm of their breathing. "Do you ever think," she asked quietly, "how different it all could have been if that one day that stupid Google search hadn't happened?" He chuckled softly. "You mean the one where you planned to fire me?" She laughed. "I wasn't planning. I was fantasizing." "Well," he said, leaning closer, "I'm glad you didn't. So am I." He reached out then, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear, a gesture so small, so natural, it felt like it had always been there. "You changed everything." "Emma," she shook her head. "No, we changed each other." He didn't argue. He just smiled, that quiet, genuine kind of smile that carries more truth than confession ever could. They sat together on the couch, the city glittering outside. He poured them each a glass of wine, and for a while, they talked not about business or headlines or anything that belonged to the world outside those walls. They talked about dreams, about books they'd never finished, about the way the lake looked different every night. At one point, Emma stood and walked to the window. The reflection of the water shimmered on her face. "It's funny," she said softly. "I used to hate my job. I thought it was stealing all the color from my life. But maybe it was just leading me here." Ethan joined her, standing close enough that their shoulders brushed. "Maybe the best things don't start the way we expect them to." She turned to him, her voice barely a whisper. "Maybe not." He reached for her hand, not like a man claiming something, but like someone returning home. And when she looked into his eyes, she saw none of the distance that had once intimidated her, just warmth, humanity. A quiet kind of love that had grown not in grand gestures, but in small, steady moments. Outside, the rain began again, soft, rhythmic, cleansing. They stood there, watching the droplets slide down the glass. For a moment, time felt suspended as if the whole world had decided to slow down and listen. Emma took a deep breath, the kind that feels like both an ending and a beginning. "You know," she said, "I don't think I'll ever Google how to fire your billionaire boss again." He laughed low and warm. "That's good." Because I was running out of clever replies. She turned to him fully, her voice playful but tender. "What if I just Google how to keep him instead?" He smiled, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I'd tell you to stop searching. You already did." The night folded around them, soft and golden. The water outside shimmered like glass. And on the coffee table, the little cactus stood still under the lamp, a tiny, steadfast thing that had outlived storms and silence, and somehow become a symbol of everything they'd built together. Emma watched the faint shadow of its spine stretch across the table, her chest warm with something gentle, certain. For the first time in a long time, she wasn't waiting for the next crisis, the next deadline, the next escape plan. She was just here. She leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder, and he rested his hand over hers. Neither of them spoke. The quiet was enough. And when the clock ticked past midnight, The reflection of the city lights danced across their faces, blending with the faint pulse of water below, a reminder that life, like the lake, never stops moving, even when everything else stands still. Outside, the rain eased. Inside, a single plant reached toward the light. And Emma, once the girl who wanted to quit, finally smiled, knowing she'd found not just her place in the world, but her peace within it. Sometimes, life teaches us through the smallest, most ordinary moments: a tired morning, a mistake, a simple plant on a desk. Emma's story reminds us that strength doesn't always look loud or bold. Sometimes it's quiet, the kind that endures, listens, forgives, and keeps growing even when no one notices. We all go through storms, misunderstandings, disappointments, days that make us question our worth. But often, those very moments guide us toward people or places that heal something inside us. The walls we build to protect ourselves can become the bridges that lead us to connection, compassion, and love. Like Emma and Ethan, we learn that dignity isn't about power, it's about kindness. Success isn't measured in titles, but in the courage to stay human when the world feels cold. And sometimes, what begins as a mistake becomes the doorway to something beautiful. So, hold on to your Larry. Whatever small, imperfect thing reminds you that resilience can bloom quietly, even in concrete places. Because in the end, it's not the storms that define us. It's how gently we choose to keep growing after they pass. Thank you so much for spending your time with this story. If it touched your heart, made you smile, or reminded you of something beautiful in life, please give this video a like, share it with someone who needs a little warmth today, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep creating stories that inspire, heal, and bring light to everyday moments. See you in the next one,